The night was silent over Mirror Lake when the gunshot shattered everything. Ethan Cole, a man who had spent half his life in war, found himself once again with a weapon in his hand. This time, not to take a life, but to protect one. Behind him, a terrified child cried out, and beside him, Ranger, his battle-scarred German shepherd, growled low, ready to face death if it meant saving them. They thought the past had died in the flames of that old warehouse, but ghosts have a way of finding men who run from them. What happened next would test the limits of loyalty, love, and redemption. It's a story about a soldier who lost everything and found it again in the most unexpected way, through a child's courage, a woman's heart, and a dog's unbreakable bond. If you've ever believed that second chances are real, or that angels sometimes wear fur, listen closely and comment where you're watching from, or simply type Amen for everyone who still believes in miracles. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beneath a pale orange sky, the horizon melting into dust and silence. The wind hissed against the cracked highway as a lone Harley-Davidson thundered through the emptiness. The rider, Ethan Cole, leaned forward against the handlebars, the kind of man who looked like he'd wrestled both war and regret, and lost pieces of himself to each. Ethan was in his mid-40s, tall and broad-shouldered, his face carved by sun and memory. A jagged scar ran from his left temple down to the stubble along his jawline, a souvenir from a roadside ambush during his SEAL days. His beard was coarse and graying, matching the silver streaks in his dark hair. The tattoos that climbed up his forearms were faded, old military insignias mixed with the insignia of a motorcycle club long abandoned, the Vultures. The bike's chrome gleamed in the sunlight, but what truly drew attention was the passenger riding behind him. Ranger, a 6-year-old German shepherd with sable and black fur, sat upright in a modified harness bolted to the frame. His amber eyes were alert beneath a weathered pair of canine goggles, the kind made for working dogs. A thin scar traced across his chest, an old battlefield injury from the days when he and Ethan had served side by side overseas. Ranger wasn't just a pet. He was a soldier, a partner, and perhaps the only creature on Earth Ethan still trusted. They'd been on the road for 3 days. No destination, no plan. Just motion. Ethan rode because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering. The smell of gasoline, the twisted wreckage of a car, and the tiny pink sneakers he never got to pick up from the pavement. His wife, Allison, and their daughter, Lily, gone in a crash he blamed himself for. The guilt had driven him first into the arms of the SEALs, then into the chaos of the Vultures. And when the noise of that life grew louder than the pain, he walked away again, this time to nowhere. The wind picked up. Ahead, a sandstorm brewed like a living thing, a golden veil swallowing the horizon. Ethan squinted behind his sunglasses. "Hang on, buddy," he muttered. Ranger barked once in response, a short, disciplined sound, the kind that said, "I'm ready." They slowed to a crawl as visibility dropped to near zero. Dust clung to Ethan's beard. He was about to pull over when Ranger suddenly stiffened, ears pricking forward. Then came the sound, faint, carried by the wind, a scream high and thin, then fading into a sob. Ethan's instincts snapped into place. Years of training turned his pulse into focus. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the moan of the desert wind. Ranger growled low, already sniffing the air. "There," Ethan whispered, following Ranger's gaze. About 50 yards ahead, The metallic glint of a vehicle lay half buried in sand. A silver SUV rolled onto its side, its tires spinning uselessly. Smoke curled from the crumpled hood. Ethan ran toward it, boots crunching gravel. Ranger sprinted beside him, muscles rippling beneath his coat. "Hello?" Ethan shouted. "Anybody here?" A weak cry answered from inside the wreckage. "Please, don't hurt me." He dropped to his knees beside the shattered window. Inside, a little girl no older than 9 sat pinned by her seatbelt, her dark hair tangled with blood and dust. Her face was pale except for a streak of dirt running down her cheek, where tears had carved through. Her school uniform, a light blue dress, was torn at the sleeve. "Hey there," Ethan said softly, lowering his voice to a tone he hadn't used in years. "You're gonna be all right. My name's Ethan. This is Ranger. We're here to help." Her eyes darted toward the dog, wide with fear. He won't bite?" Ranger, as if understanding, lowered himself to the ground and crawled forward on his belly until his nose was near the window. Then he whined softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "See? He's a gentleman." The girl's breath trembled. My leg hurts. I can't move." "Okay, sweetheart. Don't move, just breathe. I need to get this door open." The SUV's metal groaned under Ethan's grip. He braced his boot against the frame and pulled. Nothing. He looked around, spotted a jagged rock, and slammed it against the window until it shattered. Shards rained down, but he shielded her with his arm. The smell of gasoline grew stronger. He could hear the hissing of a ruptured line beneath the hood. "We're running out of time, Ranger." The dog barked once, circling to the back seat window. Together, man and dog worked like they had in the field, Ethan cutting through the seatbelt with his knife, Ranger barking to keep the girl's focus on him. When Ethan finally freed her, she whimpered, clinging to him as he pulled her out through the window. He carried her several yards away before collapsing to his knees, shielding her from the dust. Behind them, the SUV erupted in a whoosh of orange flame. The sound rolled across the desert like thunder. The girl cried out, burying her face in his shoulder. "It's okay," Ethan murmured, his voice trembling. "You're safe now, kid. I promise." Ranger sat beside them, panting, his eyes fixed on the burning wreck. Ethan reached out and placed a hand on the dog's neck, grounding himself in the simple rhythm of Ranger's breath. After a long silence, the girl whispered, "My name's Grace." "That's a beautiful name," Ethan said. "Do you know where your mom or dad are?" Grace looked back at the wreck, tears welling again. They didn't wake up." Ethan's chest tightened. He knew that look. Shock, confusion, the hollow disbelief that came when a world vanished in seconds. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "We'll get you help. I promise." He pulled off his leather jacket and wrapped it around her small shoulders. Ranger lay close, letting her tiny fingers clutch at his fur. "Good boy," Ethan whispered. He fished his phone from his pocket. No signal. The storm was cutting off reception. He'd have to move. He scanned the horizon. A faint structure glimmered in the distance. An abandoned service station. "Grace," he said gently, "I need to get you out of the wind. I'm going to carry you, okay?" She nodded weakly. Ethan lifted her, feeling the heat radiating from her injured leg. Ranger trotted ahead, tail low, scouting their path through the dust. Each step burned through Ethan's legs, but he didn't stop. The weight of the child felt fragile, sacred. She reminded him so much of Lily, that it hurt to breathe. When they reached the station, Ethan laid Grace on the dusty floor inside, next to a broken vending machine. Ranger stood guard by the doorway, nose twitching at every sound. Ethan checked the girl's pulse, steady but weak. "You're one tough kid," he said softly. Her lips quivered. Are you an angel?" Ethan almost laughed, but the sound broke in his throat. "No, sweetheart. Just a guy who got lost on the road." Ranger padded over and rested his head on Grace's lap. The girl smiled faintly through her tears. "He's warm." "Yeah," Ethan whispered. "He saved me more than once. Guess it's your turn." Outside, the storm began to fade. In the distance, a siren wailed faintly. Someone must have seen the fire. Ethan exhaled in relief. He looked down at the child and the dog curled together on the cracked floor, their trust in him absolute. For the first time in years, something inside him eased. He brushed a strand of hair from Grace's face and said quietly, "You're safe now, kid. I promise." And this time, he meant it. The fluorescent lights of Silver Creek Medical Center hummed softly, washing the sterile corridors in cold white. It was 2 a.m., the kind of hour when the world felt suspended between yesterday's chaos and tomorrow's regret. Ethan Cole sat in the waiting area, hands clasped, jacket torn and streaked with soot. Beside him, Ranger, his German shepherd, rested obediently at his boots, though his sharp amber eyes stayed alert for danger. A paramedic passed by, giving Ethan a cautious glance, the kind of look men like him got used to. Tattoos crawling up his forearms, knuckles scarred, a military dog at his feet. It all screamed trouble. Ethan didn't blame them. He'd look the same way at himself if he could. Through the glass partition, he could see the small figure of Grace Lawson, lying unconscious in the pediatric wing. Tubes snaked from her arm, her leg elevated in a sling. The tiny hospital gown looked impossibly big on her fragile body. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temple. "We did what we could, buddy," he murmured. Ranger looked up, tail giving a faint wag, before settling his head on Ethan's boot. That's when she entered. Emma Lawson moved like a woman used to exhaustion. Early 30s, maybe 33, tall and slender with tired green eyes and chestnut hair twisted into a hasty bun. Her scrubs were wrinkled, her ID badge crooked, her sneakers scuffed from double shifts. But even under the harsh lights, there was a steadiness to her, an air of quiet resilience carved by years of seeing both miracles and heartbreak. She stopped when she saw Ethan. Her gaze flicked from his scarred face to the huge dog at his side, and her entire posture stiffened. "You were the one who found her?" Ethan stood, his voice low and even. "Yes, ma'am. Out on Highway 93. SUV flipped. She was pinned inside." Emma's throat tightened. "My niece." Something in her tone, a trembling mix of fear and relief, cut through Ethan's usual reserve. He nodded slowly. "She's a fighter." Emma moved to the glass window, one hand pressed against it. "I was supposed to pick her up tomorrow. My sister and her husband were driving her home from the school play." Her voice faltered. Ethan didn't know what to say. He'd seen grief like that before. Raw, stunned, trying to stay professional because the heart hadn't caught up with the truth yet. "I'm sorry," he finally whispered. Emma turned back to him. "The doctors said she's stable, but she keeps calling out for someone. Said she doesn't want to be alone." Ethan nodded. "She woke up once, asked for her mom. Then she asked if she was in heaven." Emma's composure cracked for a second before she drew a deep breath and steadied herself. Thank you for staying until the ambulance came. Most people would have just kept driving. I almost did, Ethan admitted quietly. Then my partner here decided otherwise. He gestured to Ranger. The dog's ears perked at his name. Emma crouched slightly, studying the animal. He's military? Used to be, Ethan said. We served together. Afghanistan. He saved my life. Stepped on a pressure plate before I did. Her eyes softened. You were a medic? Corpsman, Ethan confirmed. 12 years. Emma nodded, the nurse in her recognizing the way his eyes cataloged every sound, every movement, hyper-aware, trained to spot injury and danger alike. You can tell a lot about someone by how they handle pain, she said softly. I've had my share. Seems like it. For a moment, silence settled between them. Only the steady beep of Grace's heart monitor filled the air. When the child stirred, Emma rushed in. Ethan followed at her gesture, Ranger padding close behind. Grace's eyes fluttered open, dazed but aware. When she saw Ethan, her lips parted in a faint smile. You came back. Ethan crouched beside her bed, his rough hands resting gently on the railing. Told you I'd stick around. Her gaze shifted to Ranger. And Ranger too? Always. The German shepherd let out a low, reassuring whine before resting his chin on the edge of the bed. Grace's hand found his fur instinctively, and for the first time since the crash, her breathing steadied. Emma watched the scene, emotion tightening her chest. She'd seen plenty of patients, children broken and bruised, but she'd never seen one calm so completely just by feeling safe. Ranger's good with kids, Ethan said quietly, sensing her thoughts. He knows when someone's hurting. Grace's voice was barely a whisper. He's warm. He's got a big heart, Ethan said, smiling faintly. Like his nurse. Emma blushed, caught off guard by the gentle humor. She was used to gruffness, not kindness. Over the next hours, she watched Ethan without meaning to. The way he adjusted Grace's blanket, the care in his movements, the soft commands he gave Ranger like they'd been partners for decades. There was discipline there, but also tenderness. When morning broke, the pale sunlight spilling through the blinds, Grace had drifted into an easier sleep. Emma stepped into the hallway, rubbing her temples. You should get some rest, she said. You've been here all night. I'm fine, Ethan replied. You look like you haven't slept in a week. Longer, he admitted. Emma hesitated. There's a motel 2 blocks away. I can call you if she wakes up. Ethan glanced at Ranger, then back toward the child's room. Grace stirred, mumbling softly. Don't go. That single, fragile plea froze him. Emma met his eyes and sighed. Maybe, just for a few more hours. So he stayed. By afternoon, Grace was sitting up, a tray of untouched food beside her. I'm not hungry, she muttered. Ethan sat beside the bed, resting his elbows on his knees. You need strength to heal, kid. Tell you what, if you eat half, Ranger gets the rest. Her eyes lit up. Promise? Scout's honor. Emma raised an eyebrow from across the room. You were never a Boy Scout. True, Ethan said, smirking. But Ranger was. Grace giggled for the first time, spooning mashed potatoes into her mouth, while Ranger watched with theatrical patience. The simple moment, warm, absurd, ordinary, made something loosen in Emma's chest. Later, when she stepped into the hall to update paperwork, She saw Ethan standing by the window, gazing out at the desert. There was a weariness in his stance, but also purpose. She realized she wanted to know more about him, and that scared her. "You've been through something," she said softly. "You don't talk about it, but it's there. The way you flinch when someone yells, the way your hand never strays far from that pocket knife." Ethan turned to her, eyes steady but haunted. "War leaves a noise that doesn't turn off. You just learn to live with the ringing." Emma nodded. "And the club? The tattoos?" He hesitated, then rolled up his sleeve to reveal the faded insignia of the Vultures. That was another kind of war. Before she could ask more, Grace's voice broke the tension. "Can Ranger stay tonight?" Emma looked at the clock. Visiting hours were over. The logical answer was no. But when she saw Grace's eyes, and the way Ranger's tail wagged hopefully, she found herself saying, "He can stay. Just this once." Ethan exhaled, relieved. "Thank you." As night settled again, Emma passed by Grace's room one last time. The little girl slept soundly, Ranger curled protectively at her side, one paw resting on her blanket. Ethan sat in the chair nearby, chin lowered to his chest, finally asleep. For a man who claimed to have nothing left, he looked strangely at peace. Emma lingered at the doorway, whispering to herself, "Who are you, Ethan Cole?" She didn't know that question would soon bring his past roaring back to life. The quiet rhythm of small-town life had started to settle around Ethan Cole like a fragile blanket. It had been 2 weeks since the accident. Grace was walking again, limping but smiling, and the hospital cafeteria had somehow turned into their evening ritual. Emma Lawson insisted it was temporary. Yet every night, Ethan and his German shepherd, Ranger, found themselves seated at the same table, sharing takeout boxes while Grace told stories between spoonfuls of pudding. It almost felt normal. Almost. But normal wasn't something men like Ethan were allowed to have for long. One afternoon, as the desert sun sank low over Silver Creek, Ethan stood outside the hospital parking lot, wiping grease from his hands. He had been changing the oil in his Harley, a simple job that kept his mind quiet. That's when he noticed it. A small black device no bigger than a cigarette lighter, magnetized to the underside of his bike's frame. A red LED blinked faintly in the shadow. His breath froze. Tracker. Military grade. Ranger caught the change in his scent instantly. The dog's ears perked, a growl rumbling in his chest. Ethan crouched, prying the device loose with a screwdriver. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Someone had found him. Someone who knew what kind of hardware he used to recognize. He glanced toward the far end of the parking lot. A black pickup truck sat idling too long, windows tinted dark. When Ethan looked its way, the engine roared to life, and it rolled out into traffic. He didn't need a closer look. He knew the feel of being hunted. The wolves had returned. Rick Dalton wasn't the kind of man you forgot. In the years Ethan ran with the Vultures, Rick had been the president. The alpha in a pack of predators. Late 40s, built like a bear, his frame thick with muscle and cruelty. His head was shaved smooth except for a line of faded scars running across his scalp. Relics from bar fights and prison riots. His steel blue eyes held no mercy, only calculation. Ethan remembered those eyes. They'd once been the last thing a rival biker saw before Rick's chain whip ended the argument. Rumor had it Rick had expanded their business, guns, drugs, intimidation, turning the Vultures into a small empire that law enforcement couldn't quite pin down. But there had been one job, one night, that had changed everything. A warehouse fire that left 3 civilians dead. Rick had ordered it. Ethan had refused. And that refusal had nearly gotten him killed. Now Rick's empire was at risk again. Ethan's name had surfaced in a federal probe about the fire. If he talked, the entire operation could fall apart. So Rick Dalton decided to make sure Ethan Cole never talked again. That night, Ethan drove Grace and Emma home. Their small rental house sat on the edge of town, where pavement gave way to dust and mesquite trees. Emma had finally agreed to let Ethan install motion lights outside and add locks to every window. "Overkill," she'd said with a weary smile. "Habit," he'd replied. Inside, Grace sat cross-legged on the couch, coloring. Ranger lay nearby, his head resting between his paws, eyes following every sound from the street. Emma moved through the kitchen, preparing dinner. In the glow of the stove light, she looked softer, almost domestic. The fatigue in her face couldn't hide the quiet strength beneath it. Those same green eyes that had stared down death in hospital rooms night after night. "You're tense again," she said, without looking at him. "Always am," Ethan answered, checking the blinds for the 3rd time. "You used to be a soldier," she said gently. "You don't have to live like you're still at war." He turned toward her, the lamplight tracing the angles of his face. The scar, the gray in his beard, the exhaustion that never seemed to leave. "War doesn't care if you're home," he said. "It finds you anyway." Before Emma could respond, Ranger's head shot up. His ears went stiff, body rigid. He growled low, the kind of warning sound that came from pure instinct. Ethan froze. "What is it, boy?" The dog stalked to the window, nose twitching. Then came the faint crunch of gravel outside. Tires slowing. Headlights killed. Ethan's pulse quickened. He moved quietly to the side table, lifted his leather jacket, and pulled out a Glock 19 from the hidden holster. Emma saw the weapon, her eyes wide. "Ethan, what the hell?" "Stay back," he said, "and keep her down." Ranger growled louder now, pacing near the front door. Grace looked up from her coloring book, confused by the sudden tension. "Mr. Ethan?" The first bullet shattered the window. Glass exploded across the living room, a crack like thunder splitting the night. Grace screamed. Ethan tackled her to the floor, covering her small frame with his body. Ranger lunged toward the window, barking ferociously. Another shot rang out, then another. One struck the picture frame above the couch. Ranger darted forward, placing himself between Grace and the window, body crouched low, teeth bared. "Back!" Ethan yelled, pulling the girl toward the kitchen. "Move, Emma! Now!" Emma grabbed Grace, shielding her as they crawled behind the counter. Ethan fired 2 rounds toward the shadowed yard. Controlled bursts, no hesitation. The night swallowed the return fire, and then silence. Ethan's training kicked in. "Stay down." He slipped out the side door, moving like a ghost. Ranger followed, low and silent, circling wide through the yard. Outside, the streetlight flickered over a set of fresh tire tracks leading away from the house. The faint smell of exhaust and cigarette smoke lingered. They were gone. For now. Ranger sniffed along the driveway, then stopped beside a mailbox post. A glint of metal caught Ethan's eye. A crushed cigarette butt, branded with the club's insignia, a Vulture's wing. His stomach dropped. Rick Dalton. Ethan clenched his jaw, his voice low and deadly. "They found me." Ranger's growl rumbled deep in the dark. When he re-entered the house, Emma was holding Grace close, the child trembling in her arms. The broken glass sparkled around them like frost. Ethan holstered his weapon and knelt. "They're gone," he said softly. Emma's voice shook. "Who are they?" Ethan hesitated. He'd spent years just burying that part of himself, but now the grave had been dug up. "They're men I used to ride with," he said. "Bad men. I walked away, and they don't forgive that." Emma's face paled. "And they came here? With Grace?" "I'll handle it," Ethan said firmly. "You have my word." Grace clung to Ranger, her fingers buried in his fur. "He saved me again," she whispered. Ethan met her eyes, the fear there cutting deeper than any wound. "Yeah," he said quietly. "He always does." Ranger leaned into her, his steady breathing a heartbeat of calm amid the chaos. Ethan looked out the shattered window, his reflection fractured among the shards. The wolves had returned, and this time, they weren't coming for revenge. They were coming to erase him, and everything he loved. The Utah mountains rose like a wall of silence against the dawn. Thin air and pine needles filled Ethan Cole's lungs as he turned off the dirt road, his old Harley grinding up toward the isolated cabin he had once called home. The cabin stood on a ridge overlooking miles of empty forest, sturdy logs, reinforced windows, and a view that caught every sunrise. It had been his hideout after he'd walked away from the Vultures. Back then, it was where he learned how to breathe again. Now it was where he planned to keep the people he loved alive. Emma sat in the passenger seat of the borrowed truck, her face pale under the bruised light of early morning. Her chestnut hair, once neatly tied, now fell loose over her shoulders. The exhaustion in her green eyes was mingled with fear she tried to hide. Grace slept across the back seat, her head resting on Ranger's flank. The dog lay curled protectively around the girl, his fur still matted from the scuffle 2 nights earlier. His eyes stayed open, vigilant even in rest. "Are we safe here?" Emma asked softly. "For now," Ethan said. "No one knows this place, not even the cops." She turned toward him. "And what about you?" Ethan kept his eyes on the dirt road. "I'm going back down tonight." Emma's breath caught. "Ethan, no, I have to finish it." He parked the truck in front of the cabin and stepped out. The morning light revealed the mountains stretching endless and cold. He took a deep breath. For the first time in years, he felt both purpose and dread. Ranger followed him out, tail flicking low. The dog seemed to know what was coming. "Stay," Ethan ordered quietly. Ranger tilted his head, unblinking. "I mean it, buddy. You keep them safe." The German Shepherd didn't move. Instead, he walked to the passenger side, sat down beside Emma's door, and refused to budge. Emma climbed out, folding her arms across her chest. "You really think he's going to listen?" "He's stubborn," Ethan said. "Got that from his handler." Emma smiled faintly. "You're both impossible." He helped her carry Grace inside, setting her on the couch. The cabin's interior smelled of cedar and dust. A stone fireplace stood at the center, and on one wall, a row of old photographs, Ethan and Ranger in uniform, a younger man standing beside them with a cocky grin. Emma's gaze landed on the photo. "Who's that?" Ethan hesitated. "Marcus Rivera. He served with me overseas, helped me disappear afterward. He owns a bar down in Cedar City now." "Does he know about them?" she asked carefully. "He will." Emma reached for his arm, her fingers brushing the leather sleeve of his jacket. "Ethan, if you go back there, you might not come home." He met her eyes. "If I don't, they'll come here. And that's worse." There was nothing more to say. By dusk, Ethan stood outside, tightening the straps on his holster. Ranger sat at his feet, head high, eyes steady. "I said stay," Ethan reminded. Ranger didn't blink. When Ethan started the Harley, the dog leapt into the sidecar before the engine could roar. Ethan groaned. "Damn it, Ranger." But as the bike rumbled down the mountain trail, he didn't make him get off. He knew it was useless. They were a team, and teams went into battle together. The old warehouse sat at the edge of the Nevada desert, half swallowed by sand and shadow. Its steel doors were marked with the faded insignia of the Vultures, a bird's skull surrounded by black wings. Ethan parked behind a row of derelict cars, heart pounding in his ears. Ranger sniffed the wind, tail stiff. The dog's senses were sharp, sharper than any human's. Ethan trusted them more than his own. A faint rustle. Ranger's ears flicked. "Left side?" Ethan whispered. The dog growled once. Confirmation. They moved like soldiers, silent and precise. Ethan's Glock was drawn, flashlight taped to the barrel. He stepped over broken glass, his boots barely making a sound. Inside, the smell of oil and rust was thick. The old club banners still hung from the rafters, ghosts of loyalty long dead. "Cole!" The voice echoed from the shadows, deep, coarse, familiar. Rick Dalton stepped forward, the years having turned him into something monstrous. His bald head gleamed under the overhead light, tattoos crawling up his neck like vines. His leather vest bore the same insignia Ethan had once worn. But his eyes were harder now, Tastron, feral and cold. "Well, look who crawled out of his hole," Rick sneered. "The prodigal son." Ethan didn't lower his gun. "This ends tonight." Rick laughed, the sound like gravel grinding metal. "You think you can waltz in here, kill a few boys, and call it redemption?" "I'm not here for redemption," Ethan said. "I'm here for peace." Rick smirked. "Funny. You used to preach about brotherhood. What happened to that?" "It died the day you killed innocent people," Ethan shot back. That wiped the smirk off Rick's face. He stepped closer, hands spread mockingly. "You always were soft, Cole. You thought walking away would make you clean. But you forget. You don't walk away from blood." From behind the crates, two bikers emerged, heavy, armed, faces half hidden by bandanas. Ethan's finger twitched on the trigger. Ranger growled low, hackles rising. Then chaos erupted. The first shot cracked like thunder. Ethan ducked behind a steel beam, firing back. Ranger lunged forward, teeth sinking into one attacker's arm, dragging him down. The man screamed, his pistol clattering across the concrete. "Good boy," Ethan shouted. Rick fired from the mezzanine, bullets ricocheting off the metal walls. Sparks lit the shadows. Ethan rolled for cover, returning fire with surgical precision. "Still got that SEAL aim, huh?" Rick roared. "Still can't hit. For shit!" Ethan yelled back. Ranger darted between the machinery, taking down another biker who tried to flank them. The dog moved like a ghost, silent, efficient, fearless. Then, a gunshot. Sharp, close. Ranger yelped. Ethan turned, the world narrowing to the sight of his partner stumbling, blood darkening the fur along his shoulder. "No!" Ethan fired twice, hitting the shooter in the chest. He slid across the floor, grabbing Ranger, pressing his palm against the wound. "Stay with me, soldier," You hear me? Ranger's breathing was ragged, but his eyes, those loyal amber eyes, never left Ethan's face. Rick's footsteps echoed from above. Looks like your mutt's done for. Should have left him where he belonged. Ethan's voice was low, lethal. You don't talk about him. He rose slowly, one last magazine in his Glock. The two men met in the center of the warehouse. Old allies turned enemies, ghosts surrounded by fire and metal. Rick swung first, his knife flashing. Ethan blocked, countered, slammed a knee into Rick's ribs. The blade sliced his arm, hot blood spilling, but he didn't stop. Years of combat came back like instinct. Ethan disarmed him, kicked the knife away, and pressed the muzzle of his gun to Rick's chest. Rick spat blood and grinned. Go on, Cole. Be the hero. Ethan hesitated, then lowered the gun. Rick lunged for a hidden pistol. The gunshot rang out, echoing across the desert. When the smoke cleared, Rick Dalton lay motionless. Ethan dropped beside Ranger, hands trembling. He pressed his forehead to the dog's, whispering through tears, You've done enough, soldier. You can rest now. Ranger's tail gave one weak thump. His chest rose and fell. Faint, but steady. He was alive. Ethan looked out the open doors of the warehouse, dawn bleeding into the horizon. He knew what he had to do next. To save them all, he would have to burn everything behind him. The first light of spring washed over Mirror Lake, the quiet Utah waters mirroring a sky too blue to be real. A small wooden house stood by the shore, weathered, warm, alive. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney, and the scent of coffee drifted through the open windows. Inside, Ethan Cole stirred the pot on the stove, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and a pair of jeans that had seen too many battles. The deep scar across his right arm, a souvenir from that final night in the warehouse, caught the morning sun. His once steel-cold eyes had softened, still watchful, but at peace. The haunted soldier had become a man who could finally exhale. Behind him, a soft set of footsteps approached. Emma Cole, formerly Emma Lawson, stepped into the kitchen wearing a worn flannel shirt over jeans, her hair tied in a loose braid that brushed against her shoulders. The early light painted her skin in amber tones, and there was a calm confidence in her movements, the kind earned by those who had lived through storms and still chose kindness. "You're up early," she said, smiling as she leaned against the counter. "Habit," Ethan murmured, pouring her a mug of coffee. "And Ranger doesn't understand the concept of weekends." As if on cue, the German shepherd padded into the room, nails clicking softly on the wooden floor. Ranger, now 7 years old, had gained a few white hairs around his muzzle, but his body remained strong. A long scar cut across the fur on his neck, the mark of a bullet that nearly ended him. Yet his amber eyes burned brighter than ever. He trotted to Ethan's side, nudged his leg, and wagged his tail. Emma crouched down, rubbing behind his ears. "Morning, hero." Ranger leaned into her touch, then looked toward the window as if checking the perimeter. Still the soldier, always alert. The cabin door creaked, and Grace, now 11, burst in carrying a notebook and wearing her favorite red hoodie. Her long brown hair was tied back in a messy ponytail, her cheeks pink from the cold air. "Mom! Dad! I finished my essay!" she shouted, waving her paper proudly. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Already? School doesn't start for another 2 hours." Grace grinned. "Yeah, but I wanted to read it to you first. It's called The Soldier and His Angel Dog." Emma chuckled, taking a sip of her coffee. "I wonder who that's about." Grace climbed onto the couch, clearing her throat theatrically before she began reading aloud. Her voice trembled at first, then grew steady. Once there was a man who thought he was too broken to love anyone again. He had scars on the outside and on the inside, too. He didn't believe in miracles. Until one day, he found a little girl who needed saving. But maybe she saved him instead. And there was a dog, a soldier like him, who never left his side. Together, they made a family, not because they were perfect, but because they chose each other. Grace looked up, eyes glistening. I think it's good. Ethan's throat tightened. He forced a smile. It's perfect, kiddo. Ranger barked once, as if in agreement. Later that morning, Ethan drove into town for his meeting with the FBI liaison assigned to his case, Agent Daniel Monroe, a tall man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and a calm authority that came from decades of chasing monsters. Monroe's suit was always crisp, his tie perfectly knotted, but his eyes carried the weary empathy of someone who had seen too much. They met outside the sheriff's office, the wind carrying the scent of pine and rain. Monroe extended his hand. Cole, you look better than the last time I saw you. Ethan shook his hand firmly. Guess fresh air and good company help. Monroe smiled faintly. The Bureau wanted me to thank you again. The files you turned over, they dismantled what was left of the Vultures. Rick Dalton's lieutenants are all in custody, and you, well, you're officially cleared. Ethan exhaled. So that's it. No more ghosts. Monroe's gaze drifted toward the horizon. There are always ghosts, Cole, but you've done right by them. He hesitated before adding, You ever think of coming back? The FBI could use someone like you, someone who knows both sides. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. I'm done with guns and badges. My daughter's science fair is next week. That's the only mission I've got left. Monroe smiled, understanding. Then enjoy it, soldier. You've earned it. They shook hands one last time before Monroe walked away, disappearing into the hum of the small town. By afternoon, the lake shimmered under the sun. Grace knelt by the dock, tossing pebbles into the water. Ranger lay beside her, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed. Emma stood in the doorway, watching them. You know, she said, I never thought this would be our life. The lake, the dog, the kid. Peace. Ethan joined her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Neither did I. But it turns out, peace is loud in its own way. She looked up at him. How so? He smiled faintly. Because every quiet moment reminds me how close I came to losing it. They stood there for a long time, the wind rustling through the trees, the sound of Grace's laughter echoing across the water. As dusk fell, Ethan lit the porch lantern. The golden light spilled over the wooden deck, casting warm halos on the faces of the people he now called his family. Grace curled up on the swing with a blanket and her notebook. Ranger sat beside her, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. His scar caught the dying light, glinting like a medal of honor. Ethan stepped outside, carrying 2 mugs of hot cocoa. He placed one beside Grace, then lowered himself onto the steps. Ranger shifted, laying his head gently on Ethan's worn leather boots. For a while, no one spoke. The only sound was the water lapping against the shore. Ethan broke the silence first. You ever think about what it all means, Ranger? All the running, all the fighting. Maybe it was just to get here. Ranger's ears twitched, Ethan smiled softly. Guess we made it, buddy. You, me, and the family we never thought we'd have. The dog closed his eyes, tail thumping once against the porch. Behind them, Emma leaned against the doorframe, her eyes glistening in the firelight. Grace dozed on the swing, clutching her notebook. The war was over. Not the one fought with bullets, but the one inside. The one that told Ethan Cole he didn't deserve love, peace, or redemption. Now, as the night settled over Mirror Lake, he finally believed otherwise.